The desert wind howled like a distant lament, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush and sun-baked earth through the cracked windows of the old diner on the edge of Route 66. It was just past midnight, the kind of hour where shadows stretched long and secrets felt heavier than the chrome on a Harley. Inside, under the flickering neon sign that buzzed, "Open 24/7, a boy no older than 12 sat hunched at a corner booth, his small frame trembling. His name was Noah, though the world around him had long forgotten to ask. Bruises bloomed faintly on his arms, vestiges of violence that spoke of hands too rough, words too sharp. Across from him loomed his adoptive father, a man named Victor Harlan, his face twisted in a scowl that deepened the lines etched by years of resentment. Victor's voice cut through the stale air like a knife, low and venomous. "You're mine, boy. Don't you forget it. No one's taking you from me." Noah's eyes darted to the rain-streaked window, where thunder rumbled in the distance, mirroring the storm building inside him. He'd been placed with Victor 5 years ago, after the system deemed it a stable home. But stability had curdled into something darker, a cage of control, where love was a transaction and obedience the only currency. Tonight, after another outburst at home, Noah had slipped out, hitchhiking to this forgotten stop, clutching a faded photograph in his pocket. It showed a younger man, broad-shouldered and smiling, with a leather vest slung over one arm and a baby, Noah, in the crook of his elbow. The man in the photo was Ethan Caldwell, a ghost from a life Noah barely remembered, whispered about in hushed tones by social workers who'd long since moved on. The diner's door swung open with a chime that shattered the tension, letting in a gust of cool night air laced with the metallic tang of impending rain. Ethan Caldwell stepped inside, his boots thudding heavily on the linoleum floor. He was a towering figure at 6'4", his frame weathered by 2 decades on the road, scars from old wrecks hidden under ink-black tattoos that told stories of battles fought and promises kept. His salt-and-pepper beard framed a face hardened by loss, a wife taken too soon by illness, a brother lost to the sands of some forgotten war, and a vow he'd made in a hospital room years ago, one he'd buried under miles of asphalt and the rumble of his Iron Promise crew. Ethan wasn't looking for trouble tonight. He'd pulled off the highway for coffee, chasing the ghosts that rode shotgun on long hauls. But as his eyes scanned the room, they locked on the boy, the spitting image of the infant in his dreams. Victor noticed him too, his posture stiffening like a coiled spring. "What are you staring at, stranger?" he barked, slamming a fist on the table. Noah flinched, his gaze lifting just enough to meet Ethan's. In that instant, something unspoken passed between them, a flicker of recognition, raw and electric, like the first spark of an engine firing to life. Ethan's hand hovered near his belt, not for a weapon, but for the worn keychain that held a tiny silver locket, a relic from that hospital promise. He'd sworn to the dying mother of the child he'd never claimed legally, too tangled in his nomadic life, too scarred from his own abandonments, to watch over the boy if things went south. But life had a way of eroding oaths, and Ethan had let the miles widen the gap until the boy's existence faded to a regretful ache. Now, here he was, face to face with fate's cruel joke. "Sit down, kid," Ethan said softly, his voice a gravelly timbre honed by years of commanding respect without raising a decibel. He slid into the booth opposite Victor, ignoring the man's glare. The waitress, a weary woman named Clara, with lines around her eyes from too many late shifts, hovered nearby, her coffee pot trembling slightly in her grip. Outside, the first fat drops of rain pattered against the window, blurring the neon glow into halos of red and blue. Victor's laugh was bitter, devoid of humor. "This ain't your business, biker. The boy's with me. Court papers say so." He leaned forward, his breath sour with cheap whiskey, Noah shrank back, but his eyes stayed on Ethan, searching, pleading in the silence that followed. Ethan didn't flinch. He'd seen corruption before, badges bought, families torn by ink on paper rather than blood or bond. His crew, the Iron Promise, rode for the forgotten, veterans down on their luck, kids caught in the crossfire of broken systems. But this hit like a gut punch, stirring the embers of that old vow. Court papers, Ethan echoed, his tone measured, eyes never leaving Noah's. Ever ask what the boy wants? The question hung in the air, thick as the steam rising from Clara's coffee pot. Victor's face reddened, veins bulging at his temples. He don't get a say. He's mine to raise right. But Noah's whisper cut through, barely audible over the rain's crescendo. He's my real dad. Victor froze, then exploded to his feet, chair scraping like nails on chalkboard. Liar! After all I've done... His hand shot out toward Noah, but Ethan was faster, his calloused palm intercepting the wrist with unyielding gentleness. No force, just presence, a wall of quiet authority that spoke of roads traveled and lines not crossed. Easy, Ethan murmured, releasing him but holding his gaze. No one's taking anything tonight. But we're talking this out. The diner fell into a hush, save for the storm's roar outside. Noah's finger trembled as he pointed at Ethan, the words spilling out like a dam breaking. He is. I remember. The bike. The stories Mom told. In that moment, the weight of unspoken promises crashed down. Ethan felt the locket burn against his chest, a reminder that some oaths outlived the miles. He'd walked away once, convinced his life of thunder and tar was no place for a child. But now, with Noah's eyes mirroring his own, haunted, hopeful, Ethan knew the road had led him back. This wasn't just intervention, it was redemption knocking at Dawn's door, demanding he ride into the unknown. Clara cleared her throat, breaking the spell. Coffee, all around, on the house. She poured, the dark liquid steaming like secrets unveiled. Victor slumped back, defeated for the moment, but his eyes promised retribution. Outside, lightning forked the sky, illuminating the row of bikes parked in the lot. Harleys gleaming like sentinels, their engines silent but ready. As the rain hammered down, Ethan leaned toward Noah, voice low. Tell me what you remember, son. The boy hesitated, then began, words tumbling forth in fragments, a lullaby sung over engine hum, a jacket too big draped over tiny shoulders, a promise whispered in a delivery room that time had nearly erased. Ethan listened, each detail a stitch mending the frayed edges of his soul. But shadows loomed, Victor's connections in the local force, whispers of favors owed that could bury truths under bureaucracy. By the time the storm eased to a drizzle, the diner felt like a confessional. Ethan knew this was just the spark. The fire would test everything, loyalty, justice, the family forged in chrome and conviction. He'd call his crew at first light 50 strong, riders who'd drop everything for a brother's word. But for now, in the quiet aftermath, he placed a hand on Noah's shoulder, the touch sealing an unspoken pact. The boy had pointed, and in doing so, ignited a journey that would challenge the corrupt veins of power and reclaim what fate had stolen. The road ahead twisted with peril, but Ethan Caldwell was no stranger to the ride. The rain had softened to a persistent patter, drumming against the diner's tin roof like impatient fingers on a steering wheel. Inside, the air hung thick with the aroma of fresh coffee mingling with the faint, acrid bite of Victor's lingering anger. Ethan Caldwell sat unmoving, his broad shoulders casting a shadow over the booth, while Noah's small hand clutched the edge of the table, knuckles white against the scarred wood. The boy's words, "He is my real dad," echoed in the confined space, a declaration that rippled outward like the first rumble of thunder before a storm. Victor Harlan's face was a mask of barely contained fury, his eyes darting between Ethan and Noah as if weighing the cost of escalation. He was a man built like a forgotten fence post, wiry, weathered, with the kind of pride that curdled into meanness under pressure. For 5 years, he'd worn the badge of guardian like a crown, but it fit poorly, chafing against the resentment he'd harbored since the day the courts handed him Noah. "You got no proof," Victor spat, his voice a low growl that scraped against the quiet. "Just some old picture and a kid's fairy tale. Social services knows me. They know my word." Ethan's gaze remained steady, fixed on Noah, who now stared at the floor, tracing patterns in the coffee rings on the table. The locket at Ethan's chest felt heavier, a talisman of the promise he'd made in that sterile hospital room a dozen years back. Sarah... No, her name was Lila, the woman who'd captured his wandering heart during a brief stop in a dusty border town, had looked at him with eyes fading like sunset on the horizon. "If I don't make it," she'd whispered, her hand weak on his, "promise you'll watch over him, not raise him in this life of yours, but be there for him." Ethan had nodded, the weight of her trust anchoring him in a way no road ever had. But grief and guilt had twisted that oath into silence. He'd ridden away, convincing himself the boy was better off without a father who chased horizons instead of home. Now, fate had circled back, tire tracks overlapping in the mud of reality. "Proof?" Ethan repeated, his voice calm as the eye of a hurricane, laced with the gravel of countless miles. He reached into his vest pocket, pulling out a worn envelope, yellowed at the edges. Inside was a single document, not legal, but binding in the currency of memory. A handwritten letter from Lila, dated just before her passing, affirming Ethan's place in Noah's life. "This ain't about courts yet, it's about truth." He slid it across the table, but Victor didn't touch it, his sneer deepening. Clara, the waitress, lingered at the counter, wiping the same spot endlessly, her eyes flicking toward the door as if willing reinforcements to appear. She'd seen enough late-night dramas in this outpost to know when to stay silent, but her maternal instinct pulled her closer. "Boys," she said softly, setting down a plate of untouched pie. "Maybe we all just take a breath. Storm's passing. Sun'll be up soon." Outside, the first hints of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the wet asphalt in muted greys and silvers. Ethan's bike, a black beast with chrome accents dulled by road dust, stood sentinel in the lot, its side mirror reflecting the diner's glow. He thought of his crew then, the iron promise, a brotherhood forged in the fires of shared scars. James Hawk Riley, his second in command, with a laugh that could cut through engine roar and eyes that missed nothing. Samuel Doc Thorne, the medic who'd patched more than wounds, mending souls on the roadside. And the others, 20 strong in this region, riders who'd sworn oaths of their own to stand for the overlooked. A single call, and they'd converge like wolves to a howl, engines thundering in unity. Noah shifted, his voice breaking the standoff. "Mom said, she said you'd come back, the man with the thunder machine." His words were fragile, pieced together from bedtime stories that had kept the darkness at bay in Victor's house. Ethan felt a pang, sharp as gravel under tires, remembering those early days. Hoisting the infant Noah onto his handlebars for a gentle spin around the motel lot. The baby's giggles harmonizing with the idling motor. Life on the road had seemed no place for permanence then, but regret had a way of revving up in the quiet hours. Victor's chair scraped back abruptly, the sound jarring like a stalled engine. "Enough of this nonsense. We're leaving, boy." He grabbed Noah's arm, not roughly, but with the insistence of ownership that made the child wince. Ethan rose slowly, his height unfolding like a shadow lengthening at dusk, blocking the path to the door without a word. The air crackled with unspoken tension, the scent of rain-soaked leather intensifying as Ethan stepped closer. "You heard the kid," Ethan said, his tone even, but carrying the weight of unyielding resolve. He don't want to go. Not like this. Victor's free hand balled into a fist, but he hesitated, glancing at the window where distant headlights flickered, perhaps a trucker passing, or something more ominous. Whispers in Ethan's mind recalled rumors of Victor's ties, a cousin on the local force, favors traded like spare parts in a junkyard. Corruption didn't roar, it slithered, burying truths under stacks of falsified reports. Noah pulled free, his small frame straightening with a spark of defiance. "Please," he whispered to Ethan, eyes wide with the raw hope of a lifeline tossed into churning waters. In that plea, Ethan saw his own reflection, a boy once abandoned by a father who chose bottles over blood, now staring down the cycle he swore to break. The diner door chimed again, but it was only the wind, rattling the frame like a warning. Victor backed toward the exit, his bravado cracking. "This ain't over, biker. You'll see." He stormed out into the drizzle, leaving Noah behind, the boy's choice hanging in the balance like exhaust in still air. Ethan knelt to Noah's level, the linoleum creaking under his weight. "You safe here for a bit? I need to make a call." Noah nodded, a tentative smile breaking through, fragile as morning light. Stepping outside, Ethan pulled his phone from his pocket, the screen illuminating his face in cold blue. He dialed Hawk first, the line crackling with static before his friend's voice boomed through. "Ethan, what's the play?" "Need the crew," Ethan replied, staring at the horizon where the sun breached the clouds, gilding the puddles in gold. "Got a promise to keep. Boy's in trouble, real trouble. Meet at the old crossroads by noon." There was a pause, then Hawk's affirmation, solid as forged steel. "We're riding. For the promise." As Ethan pocketed the phone, the first rays warmed his skin, chasing away the night's chill. This was no random intervention. It was the universe calling collect on an old debt. Victor's shadow loomed, but so did the thunder of approaching bikes, a family chosen, ready to roll for justice that paperwork couldn't touch. Noah watched from the window, and in his eyes, Ethan saw the road ahead, twists of bureaucracy, tests of loyalty, and the quiet honor of standing firm. The engine of redemption had started. Now it was time to throttle up. And now, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact hour you heard this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments they reach you. The sun climbed higher, turning the drizzle into steam that rose from the asphalt like ghosts fleeing the light. Ethan Caldwell stood outside the diner, his phone still warm in his hand from the call to Hawk, the horizon stretching out in a ribbon of cracked highway flanked by endless scrubland. The air carried the sharp tang of wet sage and cooling metal, mingling with the faint, comforting rumble of his Harley idling nearby, a low purr that vibrated through his boots, grounding him amid the whirlwind of resurfaced regrets. Noah's face pressed against the window inside, his breath fogging the glass in small, anxious puffs, watching as if Ethan might vanish like the figures in his bedtime tales. Ethan slid back into the booth moments later, the vinyl seat creaking under his weight. Clara had cleared Victor's spot, leaving behind a faint smear of coffee where his mug had slammed down. Noah's eyes, wide and shadowed by unspoken fears, met Ethan's without flinching now. "They're coming?" the boy asked, his voice a tentative thread in the morning hush. Ethan nodded, pulling a worn bandana from his pocket to wipe condensation from the window, buying a moment to steady his thoughts. "Yeah, kid, the best kind of family. Riders who've got your back, no questions asked." Inside, the diner felt smaller under the daylight's scrutiny, the neon sign now a dull flicker against the sun's glare. Clara busied herself behind the counter, stacking plates with deliberate clatters that filled the silence, her glances toward them laced with quiet concern. She'd poured them both fresh mugs, black coffee for Ethan, laced with milk for Noah, and now she lingered, offering a slice of apple pie that sat untouched. its cinnamon scent a warm counterpoint to the chill of uncertainty. Ethan took a slow sip, the bitter heat grounding him as he pieced together the fragments Noah had shared earlier, snippets of memory, a mother's fading voice weaving stories of a thunderman who rode the winds to keep monsters at bay. But the piece was fragile, shattered by the crunch of gravel under tires. A battered pickup pulled into the lot, its engine coughing to a stop like a final resentful breath. Victor Harlan emerged, not alone this time, flanked by two men in rumpled uniforms, badges glinting under the rising sun. The local sheriff's deputies, their postures rigid with the authority of small-town enforcers who'd long traded justice for convenience. Victor's face twisted into a triumphant smirk, his earlier retreat now reframed as strategy. "Told you it wasn't over," he called out, his voice carrying through the open door like smoke from a backfiring exhaust. Ethan rose slowly, positioning himself between the entrance and Noah, his frame a deliberate barrier. The deputies stepped forward, one with a hand resting on his holster, not drawing, but the gesture hung heavy, a silent threat woven into the fabric of routine intimidation. "We got a call about a disturbance," the taller one said, his tone flat as sun-baked clay, eyes scanning Ethan with the practiced suspicion of someone who'd seen too many drifters. "Boy's guardian says you're interfering. Step aside, sir. This is official business." Noah shrank back in the booth, his small hands twisting the edge of his jacket, the fabric worn thin from years of clinging to what little security it offered. Ethan's mind raced, not with panic, but with the calculated calm of a rider navigating a hairpin turn. He knew the game, how men like Victor greased wheels with favors, turning blind eyes to the bruises that bloomed in private. The iron promise had crossed paths with such shadows before, pulling families from the grip of corrupt hands. But this felt personal, a blade twisting at the core of his buried vow. "Interfering?" Ethan echoed, his voice steady, laced with the quiet thunder of conviction. "I'm listening to the boy, that's all." The shorter deputy snorted, pulling out a notepad, the pages fluttering in the breeze that swept through the door. "We need to verify custody. Harlan here has papers." "You?" Victor stepped closer, waving a crumpled document like a flag of conquest, his eyes gleaming with petty victory. But Noah's voice cut through, small yet unyielding, rising from the booth like a spark in dry tinder. "He's lying. He hurts me. The real dad. He promised Mom." The words landed like a skid on loose gravel, halting the deputies mid-stride. Victor's face paled, then flushed crimson, his fist clenching the paper until it tore at the edge. "Shut your mouth, you ungrateful—" But Ethan shot him a look, sharp as a headlight in fog, silencing the outburst without a raised voice. The taller deputy shifted uncomfortably, exchanging a glance with his partner, doubt flickering in the morning light, the kind that came from too many nights ignoring cries in the dark. Clara interjected then, her voice firm as she wiped her hands on her apron, stepping from behind the counter. "I've seen the boy here before, deputies. Alone, waiting out the storms. Harlan picks him up like he's hauling freight, not family." Her words were a lifeline, tossed into the fray with the simple honesty of someone who'd witnessed enough to know truth from bluster. The deputies hesitated, the notepad lowering slightly, as the distant growl of engines began to build on the horizon. Faint at first, then swelling like an approaching wave. Ethan felt it in his bones, the vibration sinking with his pulse, the iron promise converging. Hawk's voice had carried that promise over the phone, and now it materialized in the thunder of multiple Harleys, their pipes harmonizing in a symphony of loyalty. The first bikes crested the rise, chrome flashing like beacons, riders in vests emblazoned with the Iron Fist emblem, symbols of oaths sworn in blood and brotherhood. Hawk led the pack, his machine a sleek predator cutting through the steam, followed by Doc Thorne and a dozen more, engines roaring defiance against the pickup's idling sputter. Victor backed away, his bravado evaporating as the convoy rolled into the lot, kicking up dust that danced in the sunlight. The deputies straightened, hands hovering near radios, but the sheer presence of the riders, 20 now, forming a loose semicircle, spoke louder than any warrant. No aggression, just unyielding solidarity, a wall of leather and resolve that demanded respect without a word. Hawk dismounted first, his boots hitting the ground with authority, nodding to Ethan as he approached. "Heard you needed backup, brother. What's the situation?" Ethan gestured toward Noah, who peeked out from the booth, a tentative awe lighting his features at the sight of the crew, like discovering the heroes from his stories were real, their machines breathing fire and freedom. "Custody play," Ethan said low for Hawk's ears. "Boys pointing to truth over papers. We ride for him now." Hawk's eyes hardened, scanning Victor and the deputies with the precision of a hawk sighting prey. Doc Thorne hung back, his medic's bag slung over one shoulder, ready for whatever wounds, physical or otherwise, might surface. The taller deputy cleared his throat, voice edged with unease. "This doesn't change procedure. We'll need to take the boy in for evaluation." But Victor, sensing the tide turning, lunged toward the diner door, desperation cracking his facade. "You can't just—" A rider blocked him gently, a wall of quiet strength, while another helped Noah to his feet, the boy's hand finding Ethan's in a grip that sealed their bond. As the sun burned away the last clouds, casting long shadows across the lot, Ethan knelt once more, eye level with Noah. "This is just the start, son. We'll sort the papers, the promises, the whole road. You with me?" Noah nodded, his whisper fierce. "Yeah, with you." The engines revved in unison, a chorus of commitment as the crew prepared to escort them to the county seat, a neutral ground where truth could outride corruption. But Victor's parting glare promised storms ahead, his ties to the force a web that might ensnare them yet. Ethan mounted his bike, Noah perched behind him on a makeshift seat, the boy's arms wrapping tight around his waist. The convoy pulled out, dust trailing like a banner of defiance, heading into the heart of the day's heat. Redemption wasn't a straight shot. It twisted with every mile, testing oaths against the grind of reality. For Ethan, the weight on his back was more than a child. It was the revival of a life he'd left idling, now throttling toward justice's horizon. The road whispered of trials to come, hearings rigged, loyalties strained, and the quiet honor of a family forged in thunder. The highway unfurled like a vein of molten silver under the midday sun, its heat shimmering in waves that distorted the horizon into a mirage of promise and peril. Ethan Caldwell led the convoy, his Harley cutting through the air with a steady growl, Noah's small arms locked around his midsection like an anchor in turbulent seas. The boy's cheek pressed against Ethan's back, the vibration of the engine sinking with his quickened breaths, a rhythm that spoke of fragile trust blooming amid the roar. Behind them, the iron promise thundered in formation, Hawk's bike flanking the left, Doc Thorne on the right, and the rest fanning out in a protective wedge, their leather vests catching the light like polished shields. The scent of hot rubber and exhaust mingled with the dry, earthy tang of desert scrub, whipping past in gusts that tugged at Noah's jacket. Ethan's mind raced ahead to the county seat, a squat cluster of brick buildings huddled against the Badlands, where the courthouse loomed like a sentinel of faded authority. He'd been there once before, years ago, signing away rights he thought best unclaimed, the ink drying like a scar on his conscience. Now, with Noah's warmth seeping through his shirt, that old wound throbbed anew. Victor's threats echoed in his ears, not as bluster, but as the hiss of a serpent coiling in the underbrush, connections to the sheriff's office that could twist procedure into a noose. The crew knew the stakes. Silent nods over radios confirmed it. This ride wasn't for glory. It was for the quiet victory of truth over the grind of forged signatures. As they crested a rise, the town came into view, its main street baking under the relentless glare. Dust devils swirled lazily in empty lots, kicking up grit that stung like accusations. Ethan eased off the throttle, the convoy slowing to a disciplined crawl, engines purring low as they pulled into the visitor lot across from the courthouse. The building's facade, weathered stone etched with county seals, stood indifferent, its steps worn smooth by the passage of countless pleas for justice. Hawk killed his motor first, the sudden silence amplifying the distant hum of a lawnmower and the faint chatter of courthouse clerks filtering through open windows. Noah dismounted unsteadily, his sneakers scuffing the pavement, eyes wide at the array of bikes now forming an ironclad perimeter. "They're all for me," he murmured, glancing up at Ethan, who ruffled his hair with a calloused hand. The gesture rough yet tender, like polishing chrome after a long haul. "For us, kid, family rides together." Doc approached, his medic's gaze assessing Noah with gentle precision, checking for hidden signs of strain, offering a reassuring pat on the shoulder that carried the weight of battles patched in roadside ditches. Inside the courthouse, the air was cooler, laced with the musty scent of old files and polished wood, the kind of place where secrets gathered dust in filing cabinets. Ethan guided Noah to the family services desk, the crew dispersing to wait outside, Hawk leaning against a pillar, arms crossed, a vigilant shadow, others milling with purposeful nonchalance, their presence a subtle pressure against the system's rigid lines. The clerk, a middle-aged woman named Evelyn, with wire-rimmed glasses perched on her nose, looked up from her keyboard, her expression shifting from routine boredom to wary curiosity at the sight of the boy and the towering biker. "We're here to file for custody review," Ethan said, his voice level, sliding across Lila's letter and a hastily gathered affidavit from Clara, notarized at a gas station on the way. Noah stood close, clutching the faded photo, his earlier defiance now tempered by the sterile hush of bureaucracy. Evelyn scanned the documents, her brow furrowing as she tapped keys, pulling up Victor's records. Pages that painted a picture of stable placement marred by unreported incidents, whispers of complaints buried under administrative sleight of hand. Before she could respond, the door to an adjoining office swung open and Victor Harlan strode in, flanked by the same deputies from the diner, their uniforms crisp now under the fluorescent lights. The taller one, badge reading Deputy Reyes, carried a folder thick with what looked like fresh endorsements. Victor's eyes locked on Noah, a predatory gleam cutting through the room's chill. "Told you I'd handle this," he sneered, addressing the boy directly, his tone laced with the false warmth of ownership. "These outsiders don't belong here. Come on, son, we're going home." Noah recoiled, pressing against Ethan's leg, his whisper fierce. "No, you're not my home." The words hung, sharp as a spark plug igniting, drawing Evelyn's attention fully. She adjusted her glasses, voice steady. "Mr. Harlan, these documents raise concerns. We'll need an immediate evaluation, social worker on site." But Reyes stepped forward, his hand gesturing dismissively at the papers. "Ma'am, the sheriff's reviewed this. Placement stands. No need for delays." Ethan felt the tension coil in his gut, a familiar burn from standoffs where power tilted against the powerless. Hawk appeared in the doorway then, summoned by a subtle signal, his frame filling the threshold like a storm cloud. "Everything all right in here?" he asked, tone casual but edged with steel, the crew's murmur outside filtering in like distant thunder. The deputies shifted, Reyes's radio crackling to life with a dispatcher's voice, routine check but laced with urgency. Evelyn hesitated, her fingers hovering over the phone, the moral crossroads etching lines on her face. She'd seen the system falter before, good intentions ground under heels of influence. I'll call the evaluator," she decided, dialing with deliberate slowness, buying time as the room balanced on a knife's edge. Victor lunged toward Noah, but Ethan intercepted smoothly, his hand on the man's shoulder, not gripping, just present, a reminder of the brotherhood waiting beyond the glass doors. "You want to fight this, right?" Ethan murmured low, eyes boring into Victor's. "Do it clean. Let the boys speak." Victor shrugged off the touch, backing toward the deputies, but doubt flickered in his stance, the first crack in his armored resentment. Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting elongated shadows across the lot, the bikes gleaming like promises etched in metal. As the evaluator arrived, a no-nonsense woman named Grace with a notebook and compassionate eyes, Noah was led to a side room for a private talk. Ethan watched through the frosted glass, heart pounding like an over-revved engine, the weight of his old vow pressing down. This was the ethical gauntlet, not fists or fury, but the slow unraveling of lies under scrutiny's light. Grace's questions filtered through, gentle probes drawing out Noah's truths, the isolation, the sharp words that cut deeper than hands. The stories of a mother who spoke of a rider coming back. Victor paced the hall, his whispers to Reyes urgent, but the deputy's postures softened under the crew's watchful eyes, the iron promise, a living testament to loyalty that no badge could buy. Hawk clapped Ethan's shoulder, voice low. "He's strong, brother, like his old man." Ethan nodded, the locket warm against his skin. A beacon amid the bureaucratic fog. By late afternoon, Grace emerged, her expression grave yet resolute. "The boy's account is compelling. We'll recommend temporary custody transfer pending investigation, full hearing in 2 weeks." Victor exploded in protest, but Reyes held him back, murmuring about procedures, the tide unmistakably turning. Noah ran to Ethan, burying his face in the vest, the embrace sealing a bond forged in the fire of confrontation. As they stepped into the fading light, the convoy reformed, engines igniting in a chorus of solidarity. The road to true redemption stretched onward, riddled with hearings and hidden agendas. But for the first time, Ethan felt the miles lighten. Noah's hand in his was no longer a question. It was the answer, a promise revived, riding toward a horizon where justice whispered louder than corruption's growl. If this story is touching your heart, hit that like button to support more tales of redemption. The golden hues of late afternoon bled into twilight as the convoy carved through the Badlands, engines humming a steady anthem against the cooling air. Ethan Caldwell felt Noah's grip tighten around his waist, the boy's chin resting on his shoulder, inhaling the familiar scent of leather and wind-whipped dust that now carried a new layer of tentative safety. The horizon swallowed the sun in a blaze of orange and crimson, casting long shadows from the riders who flanked them. Hawk's bike, a constant shadow to the left, Doc Thorne's to the right, their presence a woven net of unyielding support. The air grew crisp, laced with the sharp bite of creosote bushes, releasing their resinous perfume under the fading light. A reminder that even in barren stretches, life clung tenacious. They pulled into a roadside motel on the outskirts of a nameless town, its neon vacancy sign flickering like a hesitant heartbeat against the encroaching dusk. The place was a relic, peeling paint on stucco walls, gravel crunching under tires as the bike settled into a loose circle around the lot. Ethan killed his engine, the sudden quiet amplifying the distant call of coyotes and the soft sigh of wind through chain-link fences. Noah slid off, his sneakers kicking up small puffs of dirt, eyes darting to the crew as they dismounted, stretching limbs stiff from the ride. "This is our stop?" he asked. Voice small but threaded with wonder, as if the motel's faded glory mirrored the uncertain dawn of their new path. Ethan nodded, slinging a duffel from his saddlebag, the zipper's rasp echoing his resolve. "For tonight, yeah, safe ground to breathe." Hawk approached, wiping sweat from his brow with a forearm tattooed in faded script, a promise etched in ink from their war days. "Ride for the fallen." He clapped Ethan's shoulder, his grip firm, eyes scanning the perimeter with habitual vigilance. "Scouts out. Doc's got the kid if he needs checking." The crew moved with practiced efficiency, some securing the bikes with chains that clinked like whispered oaths, others claiming rooms under assumed names, their vests folded away to blend into the ordinary. Inside the room, a single bulb cast a warm amber glow over threadbare carpet and a bed with a quilt patched like old wounds. Noah perched on the edge, fingers tracing the photo's edges, the image of a younger Ethan, now a talisman against the shadows of the day. Ethan sat beside him, the mattress dipping under his weight, and pulled out a thermos of coffee, black, steaming, its aroma cutting through the motel's faint mustiness. "Talk to me, son. What did that evaluator ask?" Noah hesitated, then spilled it out. The questions about Victor's house, the isolation that felt like walls closing in, the way sharp words left marks deeper than skin. "She believed me," he said finally, a spark of triumph in his eyes. "Said my story matches things." Ethan listened, the steam from the coffee curling like unspoken regrets, his mind replaying the courthouse standoff, the way Grace's notebook had captured truths Victor couldn't shout down. Temporary custody was a foothold, but the full hearing loomed in 2 weeks, a gauntlet where Victor's web of influence could snag them. Whispers from Hawk earlier hinted at it, a sheriff's brother-in-law pulling strings, reports twisted to paint Ethan as an unfit drifter. The Iron Promise had faced such gales before, weathering them with testimony from unlikely allies, veterans groups, roadside Samaritans. But this storm carried personal lightning, striking at the vow Ethan had let rust. A knock rattled the door and Doc entered, his medic's bag slung low, face etched with the quiet empathy of one who'd mended more than bones. "Brought some chow," he said, setting down wrapped sandwiches from a nearby drive-through, the bread's yeasty scent mingling with mustard's tang. Noah unwrapped his eagerly, the first real bite in hours, drawing a small smile, the kind that cracked through fear like sunlight on frost. As they ate, Doc checked Noah over subtly, noting the fading vestiges of strain on his arms, his touch gentle as a father's. "You're tough, kid. Tougher than most riders I know." The words hung, weaving Noah into the crew's tapestry, a chosen thread in their iron weave. Outside, the night deepened, stars pricking the velvet sky like distant campfires. Hawk gathered a few brothers around a flickering fire pit in the motel's rear courtyard, flames dancing shadows across their faces, the crackle underscoring low voices, plotting the road ahead. Ethan joined them briefly, leaving Noah with Doc and a borrowed comic from the saddlebag. "Victor's not done," Hawk said, poking the fire with a stick, sparks rising like defiant embers. "Got word from a contact, sheriff's pushing for an emergency injunction. Claims we're a threat to stability." The group murmured, fists clenching around beer cans that sweated in the chill, but Ethan's voice cut steady. "We counter with witnesses. Clara's affidavit, Grace's eval, and the boy. He's our compass." Back in the room, Noah had dozed off, curled under the quilt, his breathing even for the first time Ethan could recall. The biker stood by the window, peering through threadbare curtains at the lot where bikes stood guard, chrome glinting under a half-moon. The locket at his chest warmed against his skin, Lila's whisper echoing, "Be there for him." He'd failed once, miles erasing the pull, but now the road looped back, demanding he throttle toward amends. A phone buzzed, Hawk's text, eyes on a tail, pick up like Victor's, 2 miles back. Tension coiled, but Ethan exhaled slow, the motel's hum a lullaby against brewing peril. Dawn crept in with a blush of pink, filtering through cracks in the blinds, rousing them to the scent of dew-kissed gravel. Noah woke with a start, disoriented. then relaxed at Ethan's silhouette by the coffee maker, brewing a fresh pot that filled the air with bitter comfort. "We riding again?" the boy asked, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Ethan handed him a mug of warm milk, nodding. "To a safe house up north. Crew's got a spot off the grid. Give us time to build the case." As they packed, the convoy stirred, engines coughing to life in a symphony that vibrated through the walls, a call to arms wrapped in loyalty's roar. But as they rolled out, the pickup reappeared in the rear view, a shadow trailing at a distance, Victor's resentment manifesting like exhaust in the morning mist. Ethan signaled Hawk, who peeled off to shadow it, his bike vanishing into a side road with predatory grace. The miles stretched, testing resolve, the wind whipping tales of trials yet to come, forged alibis unraveling, deputies turning coats under scrutiny's glare, and the quiet power of a boy's truth, piercing corruption's veil. For Ethan, each twist brought Noah closer, the weight on his back a redemption's load, lightning scars, forging a family from thunder and trust. The horizon beckoned, promising justice not in vengeance, but in the honor of promises kept, mile by unyielding mile. The morning sun clawed its way over the jagged rims of the Badlands, painting the highway in strokes of fiery gold that chased away the night's lingering chill. Ethan Caldwell throttled steady, the Harley's engine a deep, resonant thrum that pulsed through his veins like a second heartbeat. Noah's arms wrapped firm around his torso, the boy's warmth a quiet anchor against the rush of wind. The convoy stretched behind them, a phalanx of chrome and leather, Hawk's bike now rejoined after his detour, the faint dust plume from the pursuing pickup swallowed by distance but not forgotten. The air whipped sharp with the scent of sun-warmed asphalt and wild juniper, carrying whispers of the safe house ahead, a weathered cabin tucked in a forgotten canyon, off-grid and guarded by the crew's unyielding watch. Ethan's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, the glint of determination hardening his gaze. The tail had peeled off at the last junction, but its shadow lingered like exhaust haze. Victor's doing, no doubt, a probe to test their flanks before the real strike. The full hearing loomed in 10 days now, a coliseum of legal maneuvering where truths would clash against fabricated shields. Hawk had radioed in the details, the sheriff's office buzzing with motions to dismiss, affidavits from witnesses claiming Ethan's nomadic life a peril to stability. Corruption's tendrils reached deep here, greased by small-town favors, deputies turning blind eyes, clerks shuffling files into oblivion. But the iron promise had roots in such soil. They'd unearthed buried injustices before, pulling them into the light with the persistence of roots cracking stone. Noah shifted slightly, his voice muffled against Ethan's vest. "That truck. It's him, isn't it, watching us?" The words carried a child's intuition sharpened by years of vigilance. The kind born from tiptoeing around tempers in dim-lit homes. Ethan reached back, squeezing the boy's knee, a gesture rough-hewn yet tender, like adjusting a loose chain on a drive belt. "Maybe, but we're not running blind. Got eyes everywhere." Ahead, the highway dipped into a shallow valley, scrub oak clustering like silent sentinels, their leaves rustling in the breeze that tugged at the riders' bandanas. The crew tightened formation, Doc Thorne signaling a sweep to the flanks, his bike veering wide to scan the empty shoulders where ambush might hide in mirage. By midday, the canyon mouth yawned open, a narrow gash in the earth flanked by rust-red cliffs that rose like ancient guardians. The safe house nestled at its heart, a log structure half hidden by boulders, its tin roof scarred by years of hail and neglect, smoke curling lazily from a stone chimney where a lookout had kindled a fire. The convoy rolled in single file, engines winding down to a hush as tires crunched over gravel laced with pine needles. Ethan dismounted first, helping Noah down with hands that dwarfed the boys, the air here cooler, infused with the resinous bite of ponderosa and the faint, earthy damp of a hidden spring. Riders fanned out, 2 to perimeter watch, chains securing bikes under camouflage netting, the metallic clinks echoing off the rock faces like coded signals. Inside, the cabin breathed simplicity. Rough-hewn beams overhead, a pot-belly stove radiating warmth that chased the canyon's shadow chill. A long table scarred by knife games and old maps dominated the space, flanked by mismatched chairs where the crew gathered, vests slung over backs like shedskins. Hawk spread a worn atlas, his finger tracing routes to the hearing site, voice low and gravel-edged. "Sheriff's got a roadblock planned. Routine check, they say. But it'll snag us if we're not sharp." Samuel Doc Thorne nodded, unpacking his bag to reveal not just medical supplies, but a stack of printed forms, character references from veterans' halls, sworn statements from Clara and Grace, pieced together via encrypted calls during the ride. Noah hovered near the stove, warming his hands, eyes tracing the iron promise patch on a nearby jacket, the iron fist clenched around a broken chain, symbol of oaths that bound tighter than law. Ethan pulled a chair for the boy, the wood creaking like a confession under weight, and sat across, the locket at his chest a subtle throb against his skin. "This place is ours for now. No one's getting through without a fight we choose." Noah's gaze met his, the haunted flicker from the diner softened by the day's miles, replaced by a budding resolve. "What if they lie more? About Mom? About you?" The question hung, raw as an exposed wire, stirring the embers of Ethan's guilt. The years he'd let the promise idle, convincing himself a rider's life was no cradle for fragility. Lila's voice echoed in memory. "Watch over him. Ethan, show him what strength looks like, not in fists but in standing." He'd faltered once, but the road's loop had brought reckoning, demanding he rev toward repair. The afternoon wore on in measured tension, the canyon's walls muffling the world outside to a serene isolation, broken only by the crew's low murmurs and the occasional crackle of the fire. Doc tended to Noah with quiet expertise, sharing tales of roadside rescues, mending a fallen rider's spirit with stories of unbreakable bonds, his words weaving the boy into the fold like a new patch on old leather. Hawk coordinated with distant contacts, a network of chosen kin, ex-cops disillusioned by badges tarnished, nurses who'd seen the system's scars up close, all ready to testify to the moral compass guiding the promise. But shadows crept in with the lengthening dusk. A radio crackled to life, Hawk's face tightening as he listened. "Victor's lawyered up, pushing for supervised visits, says it'll prove his care, and they've got a psych eval lined up, aimed at you, Ethan. Drifter with a past." The words landed like gravel in a fuel line, clogging the flow of hard-won peace. Ethan stepped outside, the canyon air crisp now, stars emerging like pinpricks in indigo velvet, the spring's trickle, a soothing counterpoint to the knot in his gut. Noah followed, small feet padding on the packed earth, and they sat on a log by the water's edge, the moon silvering the ripples. "I was scared too once," Ethan admitted, voice a rumble softened by the night. "Left my own dad young. Thought the road would outrun it. But promises, they ride with you, son, yours and mine." Noah leaned against him, the contact a bridge over chasms of loss, his whisper fierce. "We'll beat them, like the stories." Back inside, the crew fortified plans, decoy rides to draw the tail, affidavits cross-verified, a dawn departure to slip the net. Sleep came fitful, the cabin's walls echoing with the wind's low moan through the canyon. Dreams, tangled with visions of hearings where truth faced down deceit. Ethan woke before first light, the stove's embers glowing like resolve unquenched. Noah stirring beside him on a cot, the boy's trust a weight lighter than regret. As the convoy roused, engines humming to life in the pre-dawn hush, the tail's threat loomed closer, Victor's web tightening for the kill. But in the iron of their unity, Ethan felt the shift. Redemption not as a distant horizon, but a throttle gripped firm, propelling them toward the hearing's fire. The canyon released them with a whisper of wind, bikes roaring into the grey, loyalty's thunder drowning corruption's snarl, mile by defiant mile. The canyon's echo faded behind them as the convoy surged onto the open road, the pre-dawn grey yielding to a sky streaked with the first blush of light, like blood on steel after a long night's forge. Ethan Caldwell leaned into the wind, his Harley's frame vibrating with purpose, Noah's small form a steady presence at his back, the boy's breaths syncing with the engine's pulse, a rhythm of reclaimed trust amid the rush of sage-scented air. The iron promise rode tight, 20 bikes carving the highway like a blade through silk, Hawk's lead scout peeling ahead to scout for snares, Doc Thorne anchoring the rear with his watchful eye. Exhaust trailed in silver wisps, mingling with the crisp bite of morning dew evaporating from the asphalt. A scent that sharpened the senses for the battle ahead. The hearing, now mere hours away, where Victor's web would tangle or snap under the weight of unyielding truth. Ethan's grip tightened on the handlebars, the leather wraps worn smooth by years of grip and release, much like the vow he'd clutched through miles of doubt. Lila's locket swung gently against his chest, a pendulum marking time reclaimed. No longer a ghost, but a compass pointing toward the courthouse in the county seat, its spire piercing the horizon like a challenge. Whispers from the crew's encrypted chatter had painted the peril. Victor's lawyer, a slick operator with sheriff's backing, armed with psych reports branding Ethan a transient risk, affidavits from planted neighbors swearing to Victor's devoted care. Corruption slithered in the details, files altered overnight, evaluators leaned on with veiled threats, but the promise had countered with their arsenal. Clara's sworn account of Noah's solitary nights at the diner, Grace's evaluation etched with the boy's raw testimony, and a chorus of witnesses from the fringes, veterans who'd shared campfires with Ethan, nurses who'd patched his crew's wounds, all vouching for a man's honor forged in quiet acts, not flash. As the sun crested fully, gilding the Badlands in molten hues, the convoy crested the final rise, the town sprawling below like a faded postcard, dusty streets flanked by low adobe buildings, the courthouse a squat bastion of faded brick at its core. Engines throttled down to a disciplined rumble, pulling into the lot in a formation that turned heads, locals pausing mid-stride, whispers rippling like heat waves off the pavement. Hawk dismounted with a nod, his boots grinding gravel as he scanned for tails, the pickup from before nowhere in sight, but its absence felt like a held breath. "They're inside, waiting," he murmured to Ethan, voice gravel low over the cooling ticks of metal. "But we've got the room packed, no empty seats for their games." Noah slid off the bike, his sneakers firm on the ground now, no longer tentative, the canyon's refuge having steeled his gaze. He clutched the faded photo like a shield, eyes flicking to the crew as they formed a loose honor guard, vests donned, patches gleaming under the sun, symbols of oaths that outlasted ink on paper. Ethan knelt to his level, the air between them thick with the day's building heat, dust motes dancing in the light. "This is it, son. Speak your truth in there. I'll be right behind you." Noah nodded, a fierce spark in his eyes mirroring Ethan's own. The boy who'd pointed in the diner now standing tall, the weight of his words a lever to pry open locked doors. The courtroom hummed with restrained tension, its wooden benches worn smooth by years of pleas and verdicts, the air heavy with the polish of oak and the faint acrid tang of old coffee from the Clark station. Judge Harlan, no relation to Victor, but a name that twisted irony's knife, presided from the bench, her face a mask of impartial steel, glasses perched like a gavel's edge. Victor sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by his lawyer, a weasel-faced man in an ill-fitting suit, his folder bulging with what he called irrefutable stability. The deputies loomed in the back, Reyes's badge catching the light filtering through high windows. but their postures held a subtle shift. Rumors of internal probes, sparked by anonymous tips from the Promises network, had them glancing at doors rather than glaring. Ethan and Noah took their seats, the crew filling the rows behind like a wall of living conviction, Hawk's arms crossed, Doc's medic bag at his feet, ready for emotional triage. The judge called order, her gavel a sharp crack that silenced murmurs, and proceedings unfolded like a slow-burn duel. Victor's side first, painting a portrait of sacrificial guardianship, the lawyer's voice oily as he waved psych evals, decrying Ethan's rootless existence. Snickers rippled from planted allies, but Noah's turn came like a storm breaking. Led to the stand by Grace, the evaluator's hand gentle on his shoulder, the boy faced the room without flinching, his voice steady as canyon wind. Victor's not family. He locks me in, yells things that hurt worse than falls. But him, Noah pointed at Ethan, the gesture echoing that diner night raw and electric. He's the one Mom promised, the Thunderman who came back. The words landed like tires on wet pavement, skidding through pretense. Grace followed, her notebook a testament. The child's account details patterns of emotional isolation, inconsistent with secure attachment. Mr. Caldwell's history, while unconventional, shows a network of support, voluntary aid to communities, no priors of neglect. Clara testified next. Her diner apron traded for a simple blouse, recounting nights of Noah's quiet despair. Then the witnesses poured in. A veteran from a roadside shelter, voice cracking as he spoke of Ethan's aid during a breakdown. A nurse who'd treated the crew, praising their code of care. Even Reyes was called, his testimony reluctant but damning, admitting to overlooked complaints. The sheriff's pressure a shadow he could no longer ignore. Victor's facade cracked midway, his outbursts silenced by the gavel, sweat beading on his brow as the web unraveled. His lawyer blustered, but the judge's eyes narrowed at the exposed threads. Falsified reports, undue influence traced to backroom deals. By recess, the air thickened with shifting tides, the crew's silent solidarity, a pressure that bent the room's gravity. Ethan caught Noah's eye across the aisle, a nod passing between them. Father and son, bound not by blood alone, but by the promise that had survived the miles. The verdict came at dusk, the judge's voice resonant in the emptying hall. Custody granted to Ethan Caldwell pending formal adoption, Mr. Harlan's placement revoked. Investigation into procedural irregularities to follow. Victor slumped, led out by deputies whose badges now felt heavier, his glare a dying ember against the Promises' flame. Noah ran to Ethan, the embrace fierce, the courtroom's echo fading to the soft hush of relief, tears unspoken but felt in the tremor of held hands. Outside, the sun dipped low, casting the lot in amber glow, bikes waiting like faithful steeds. The crew erupted in restrained cheers, Hawk's laugh booming as he clapped Ethan's back, Doc enveloping Noah in a bear hug that smelled of antiseptic and solidarity. They mounted up, engines igniting in a triumphant roar, the convoy rolling out under a sky-bruised purple with promise. Ethan felt the locket settle, light as forgiveness. Noah's arms around him, a future mapped in open road. Redemption wasn't an end. It was the throttle forward, family chosen, justice moral, oaths eternal. The wind carried them homeward, thunder fading to a contented hum, scars mended in the ride. Thank you for joining us on this journey of promises kept and roads reclaimed. If these stories of quiet courage move you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We've got more tales riding your way.